For those of you who were there yesterday, you will remember that the focus of the day on climate and SDG finance, there was one finding and one hope, and it was saying that the probability is that it is the central banks that can make a big difference. And we have one such champion here. Dr. Sabine Mauderer is a member of the executive board of the Deutsche Bundesbank, and she actually called, and it seemed like a revolution at the time, for central banks putting climate change higher on the agenda. She is part and parcel, and she is chair of the work stream Scaling Up Green Finance. She is also one of the driving forces behind the NGFS, and I'll translate that into Network for Greening the Financial System. So it is that we say thank you very much for sharing your views with us, Dr. Mauderer.
Ladies and gentlemen, we are going through challenging times. The COVID-19 pandemic has caused disruptions to our societies and our economies. While the loss of economic wealth is enormous, some countries with stronger social systems and better healthcare infrastructures have been more resilient than others. But every crisis is also an opportunity. So what can we learn from the pandemic, and what are the lessons for the even bigger challenge of climate change? Well, the answer is easy. Just like the pandemic, climate change is a global systemic threat many scientists have been flagging for decades. And just like the pandemic, climate change will cause enormous costs for our economies and our societies. So it is not a question of if, but how we have to act. Here are my 3 core messages on how to act, and they are closely interlinked. First, we need an adequate carbon pricing system. The idea is to incentivize producers and consumers to change their behavior and to encourage more climate-neutral alternatives. Second, we have to raise broad awareness across the G20, and that we can only combat climate change if the real economy undergo transformation. Both the private and public sectors need to fulfill their roles as agents of change. More public and private money needs to flow into research and development, fostering climate-friendly innovation. This will help us master the necessary transformation in the real economy. Transformation is a precondition for resilience, and resilience is the key to economic survival. My third and final message goes out to the financial institutions. Be a real driver of the economic transformation. If and when capital flows more strongly into climate-friendly economic activities, the financial system can play a crucial role in changing the real economy. And this is the spirit of the Paris Agreement. And to achieve the goals of the Paris Agreement, financial institutions need better data to assess the financial risk related to climate change, and central banks can serve as catalysts here by fostering international disclosure and standardization of data. We need to leverage our capacities as monetary policymakers, banking supervisors, and guardians of financial stability. Ladies and gentlemen, let me stop here and briefly conclude. First, we need an adequate carbon pricing system. Second, our real economies need to transform. And third, financial institutions must be the drivers of the transformation. Central banks can act as catalysts. The overarching goal must be a more sustainable and resilient planet, and it is worth the effort. Thank you.
Thank you again to Dr. Sabine Mauderer. Very clear messages there, 3 of them. Mishari, what's your take on that?
Yeah, well, nothing much to add. It was clear and to the point. The role of the financial institutions must be amplified and directed to support sustainable transformation for and actually for the financial institution to be the real driver of change. But actually what is concerning is the comment of Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina at the beginning, which was that the role of the financial institution is unfortunately under expectations, and more effort must actually be put to for the financial institution to actually scale up their finance and align the financial flows with the Paris Agreement and the SDGs. And this actually was one of the core messages and call to action that civil society organization stated as part of the C20 policies. Thank you.
Thank you, Mishari. I'll start from Riyadh and here in Hamburg, Klaus Mielke.
Yes, 2 points from my side. Point 1 is absolutely positive, and that is really helpful to get such a encouraging speech. And that is also important for the group which is in this network of central bank representatives, that they encourage each other to do more in this direction, to find out what are the pathways for the next future. And we have to keep in mind that not all of the G20 members are with their central banks in this network. So hurry up to do it. I think that's important to have the discourse, and that's my point 2. Of course, these are wonderful horizons described by her and what is really needed. But what is really the take of the Deutsche Bundesbank and the central banks to make the system really a responsible system? In the sense, what are the systemic challenges in front of us? We had the discussion yesterday. So follow your words, and what is the action following that? And there is an interconnection between the central banks, the private banks, and of course a regulator in a good way, but they are in a conjunction in the G20 finance minister track. The central banks are there with the finance ministers. So I hope this discussion will speed up and give more results. And the proof you have to give from the central banks is what's the outcome on recovering better with COVID-19 recovering programs. And the second one is the debt relief question we also had yesterday with Mr. Zattler from World Bank and others. It's a need to help those who are in a real big problem now, financially, and also for people the most vulnerable we had also in the first speech today.
Thank you very much, Klaus, and a big thank you to you, Mishari, for the both co-commentating and co-moderating of this morning's high-level panel and session. Absolutely a pleasure to have Riyadh and Hamburg presented this morning. And ladies and gentlemen, I've asked frequently about questions for the chat. I'm going to give 2 answers, but for those of of you already in the system. We're going to have Mentimeter in a moment. So let me first of all give one answer to a question in the chat that was actually directed at Dr. Sven Teske, and that remark was about 71% of the planet being the ocean, and that being used as a carbon sink. And all I can tell this person from, not myself, but of course from Dr. Teske, that had been priced in the study, in the counting, in the putting together of the system. Then we've just had a question to Dr. Mauderer, who cannot answer because that was a pre-recorded message on carbon taxing. But I think that is something that we will discuss again tomorrow. And so that question is not lost. Now, let's go to Mentimeter. The game, as usual, use your QR code, and should you not be fast enough to get your camera going and to actually use the QR code in order to get onto Mentimeter and answer the questions, then you can also just put in menti.com in your browser and enter the code that you see there, 9895544. And I hope that you can actually see it rather than me telling you. Now, once you're in the system, there is something what we would like to know, and it's probably relatively easy to answer from your point of view. Do you think that the G20 or your own government is on track for a better recovery from the COVID-19 crisis? So when you see the question that is going to be posed, you can click on the right button, and we already have a sort of result, actually quite astonishing. I assume that's 3.1 out of 10. Yes, and so people on the whole, I think that they consider their own government to be a bit more on track than the G20. But of course, as you see, it might also be a question of how many people are actually doing the menti.com. And we have a second question for you. So the second question is, what is your main recommendation to the G20 for a better recovery? So could those who are in the system just share with us in a nutshell what they think? And we are, of course, waiting. And again, you and everybody behind the Foundations 20 are putting together recommendations bit by bit, of course, with the inputs that we have now here in the studio with all our speakers. And then when are we exactly going to hear about the recommendations? Thursday afternoon.
Thursday afternoon, that's right. And it's building on all what we have done the years before, but now also referring to the actual debate we have on the table with recovering better and so, but how to combine it right with the climate crisis and the SDGs question.
Now, this is 5, 6, 7 answers, 8 answers, and if I count more, then I'll learn how to count properly. Now, thank you very much for all your recommendations that we can see. I think one of the aspects there, the strengthening of the multilateral system, of course, Klaus, right at the moment we are living in a world where multilateralism is sort of having an icy environment to get through. We are almost on track. It's just shortly before 12 o'clock. We've been in the studio now for 2 hours, and we'll have round about an hour's break. But you can have that break in the fashion that we've already recommended to you yesterday. Because if you go back to the homepage, if you're watching us on the screen, just scroll down and you will notice that there is not just a chat room, but just underneath it, there is the room where you can enter Yo Tribe. And if you're new to Yo Tribe, you just have to sort of accredit yourself. You have to sort of follow the instructions. Don't worry, you don't have to do it all the time. In Yo Tribe, you can actually have a chat with the person that you really want to meet and you always wanted to talk to, of everybody that is in that Yo Tribe room. And otherwise, we hope that you grab yourself a cup of coffee, tea, whatever you need to do. We'll see each other here in an hour's time. And don't forget to onboard, because if you don't onboard early, you're going to miss our wonderful pianist. And with that, Klaus, one last word from you. There's always one last word from the boss.
It was great. And it was great to listen to these very responsible people. And I think it's encouraging to listen to these positive voices. We know there are some other voices on the ground and combating what is really necessary and to building up barriers. But I think there are many points we just could see via Mentimeter that shows up collaboration and more multilateralism is absolutely needed, and we can do it.
Last thing, this afternoon we have the Nexus, climate crisis, of course, and biodiversity, the other underlying big issue that we need to tackle. And of course, the most important question is about food as well, how we're going to feed the world in 2050 and not destroy the planet. So we're going to answer some of these questions this afternoon. See you then.